Motion blur is a fascinating technique that's one of the best ways to convey a sense of movement in an otherwise static image or even in video footage. This is an interesting technique, especially considering that in most cases, photography, for example, is used to freeze time with a still image. Still, in some cases, conveying a sense of motion and movement is arguably a better option than simply freezing the action, and is a much better way to add a dynamic sense of life and action to the photograph or the scenes that you shoot. Hang on till the end of this video, because I'm going to share with you my best tips to achieve motion blur in your photos and the video and film scenes that you shoot. Hi, I'm Jim Costa. I'm a full-time working photographer, video producer, video editor, and technology pro. I want to get going on the topic quickly, but do stick around till the end of this video, because I'll tell you about some freebies and training courses I offer to improve your photography, video production, and filmmaking work, and to help grow your business through something that's known as earned media exposure, which is basically free advertising. If you like what you see, smash that subscribe button and hit that bell to be notified every time I upload a new video each and every Wednesday. Remember, I welcome your comments, questions, and more on all of my videos. Many shooters are primarily concerned with getting proper exposure and achieving sharp focus. These are crucial skills to help your camera capture high-quality images and footage, but you can also maintain control over the amount of motion blur in your footage as well. So what are the types of motion blur? There are two basic kinds of motion blur: a blurred subject with the background in focus, and a blurred background with the subject in focus. This is also known as panning. So let's look at both types. The first one is a blurred subject with the background in focus. Intentionally blurring the subject is a great way to incorporate movement and show just how fast the subject is actually moving. Often, this technique is used to capture night traffic, where the car's headlights and taillights become blurred lines of movement. Another example of this technique is shooting a waterfall, for example. Using a slow shutter speed to capture the water as it moves creates a blurred effect of the falls, while the rest of the scene remains clear and in focus. The second type is blurred background with the subject in focus, and that's achieved by panning. Panning is another popular way to capture motion blur and is ideal for those times when you want the moving subject to remain in focus and the background to be blurred. Panning involves using a relatively slow shutter speed, something like 1/30th of a second or longer, and focusing on the subject itself. You then track the subject through the viewfinder while it moves. In a photo, for example, with the subject in focus, release the shutter. The result is a clear and in-focus subject and a blurred background that conveys a wonderful feeling of motion. The same is true for video. However, the slower your shutter speed, the more likely your subject will be blurry, which may or may not be the look that you want. So how do you go about capturing motion blur? It can take a lot of practice to perfect the art of motion blur, especially panning, but motion blur is a great trick to add to your photography and videography skill set. Panning and capturing motion blur can also be a lot of fun. Here are some tips to help you to capture that motion blur. Number one is slow down your shutter speed. Your shutter speed is the most important setting when it comes to motion blur. The speed at which the shutter opens and closes is what will either freeze the action or render it as a blur. Your shutter speed should be slow in order to blur the movement, but the precise speed that you'll want to use will depend upon a few factors, including how close you are to the subject and the speed of the subject. If you're shooting a race car, for example, you'll want to use a relatively fast speed to capture the blur. This will freeze the car, but blur the background behind it. However, if you are shooting a subject that's moving slowly, you're going to need a much slower shutter speed to capture the movement as blur. There really isn't a one-setting-fits-all solution to this when it comes to shooting motion blur. It requires a lot of experimentation to get it just right. Whether it's a fast-moving action scene in a movie or flowing water, or low light shooting, knowing how to set your shutter properly can help you achieve the precise look that you want. Generally speaking, slowing the shutter speed more will add more motion blur to whatever it is you're shooting. In sum, the primary reason to adjust your shutter speed is to achieve the type of motion blur you want in your project. Fast action scenes will use a faster shutter speed to give a staccato feeling to your footage, while scenes shot with a slower shutter speed can enhance a dreamlike, surreal feel to the footage. Number 2 is to stabilize your camera. Be sure to stabilize the camera when shooting motion blur. Using slow shutter speeds and longer exposures can cause the entire image to become blurred. Using a tripod is usually the best option, but finding a stable surface to put your camera down onto will work just as well. For photography, you might also consider using a remote release to prevent the camera from shaking when you release the shutter. Using a tripod or monopod when panning is optional for photos, and largely a matter of personal preference, but it is an absolute requirement for video and film. You'll want to find a way to steady the camera that works best for you. Number 3, compensate for the slow shutter speed if there's too much light. Since your shutter speed is going to be left open longer than normal to capture some blur, you may need to compensate for the extra light. A smaller aperture or a bigger f-stop number is generally used to help reduce the amount of light hitting the sensor, allowing you to use a slow shutter speed without hurting the exposure. If you use shutter priority mode, your camera will adjust the aperture for you. However, stopping the aperture down will affect your depth of field, so keep your exposure triangle in mind when adjusting the aperture. I do not recommend adjusting the ISO higher when shooting slow motion, as higher ISOs add noise to the image, and that will look terrible in motion blurred footage and still pictures that you shoot. Keep your ISO under 400. The lower the better. You'll want to keep a low ISO since a low number will make the camera less sensitive to light. If you're shooting in manual, you'll want to open up the aperture as you increase the shutter speed and close down the aperture as you decrease the shutter speed. Using a neutral density filter is another great way to reduce the amount of light that reaches the sensor. These filters act like sunglasses for your camera, reducing the amount of light that comes through the lens and allowing you to use a slower shutter speed during bright lighting conditions. Now, if this is making sense to you, but I've got it in the comments section below. My question of the day is, have you ever shot motion blur before? If so, what were you shooting? Leave a comment below and let me know. If you found the information in this video useful, I'd like to hear about it from you. If you liked it and want to see more videos like this, then follow my YouTube channel, Jim Costa Films. If you think what you saw was great, please do like it. If you have an opinion, feel free to comment below. If you know someone who could benefit from the information that I provided, please share the video. You can connect with me and my company, Jim Costa Films, on social media and online, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and the web by searching for Jim Costa Films. In fact, I currently have over 4,500 videos on my YouTube channel, Jim Costa Films, so feel free to check out many of my other videos for great tips and suggestions. Thank you for sticking around this long. I mentioned at the beginning about some freebies and training. As a professional video producer and photographer, I've created an absolutely free cheat sheet for you on all the best camera settings to shoot with your DSLR, mirrorless, or video camera that will show you the settings that will allow your photos, and particularly your videos, to shine and stand out from the competition. The link to get that cheat sheet is just below in the video description. Best of all, my cheat sheet specializes in shooting video with any type of camera. In it, you'll find all the info you need on important video techniques such as white balance, color temperature, frame rates, and more. I've also created an editing training course for Adobe Premiere Pro. My Quick Start training is designed to get you up and editing video in under 2 hours and includes over 100 tips, tricks, and keyboard shortcuts for editors that get you started in the program and makes your workflow go much faster. Now, I'm also affiliated with Christina Nicholson, a fellow media veteran like myself who helps businesses and entrepreneurs reach tons of their ideal customers or clients through the power of media without spending big bucks on advertising. I've worked with Christina and used her advice and training successfully, so I know from firsthand experience that it works great. The program Christina and I are now offering is called the Media Mentoring Program, and it will help you to take advantage of mainstream media so you can stand out from the competition, because that's not something everyone has access to. Best of all, unlike paid ads and sponsorships, you can gain lots of exposure and credibility to become the go-to brand everyone talks about and wants to do business with without spending a fortune on advertising, because the program is geared to get you free advertising. I'll link to those cheat sheets and training courses in the description below as well. There's videos on both courses that will give you an overview of how they can help you, and links to get more information. You can help to support my channel by purchasing my training courses, requesting my free downloads, or by hiring me to shoot and edit for you. Remember, I've also done many other videos on video and filmmaking, and I'll link to those in the description below. Finally, if you follow me for a while now, you know that I have a private community of photographers, videographers, and filmmakers just like you on Facebook, where I share other pro tips and tricks. It's called Video Producers and Content Creators. I love new members who want to share their work, learn from others, and also help others based on their own skills and experience. The group is private and only for people in the filmmaking, video production, and photography industries that I personally work in myself. It's not a public group like my business Facebook page that I talked about earlier. That's public and anyone can see that because I want them to be able to find my business, and hire me. You'll find a link to that group in the description below, so feel free to join it where you can learn even more.